being conducted in the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office with defendant William Bonin.
These tapes, they were meant to be confidential. They were never meant to be released.
Where is he stabbed?
I stabbed him in the side, both sides, and up in the upper left part of the back.
Knowing that these tapes exist, I'm totally flabbergasted. I can't even believe it.
How did you ruffle his scream?
I stabbed him in the mouth.
I've covered many, many murder stories in my 48-year career on television. And what happened on these murders and how these poor young victims died turned my stomach.
I know a couple of times to make sure somebody was dead, I would scratch the eyeball with the knife.
It became a point where it was almost like you picked up the newspaper and there would be another murder.
The ice pick was inserted into his left ear and both nostrils. Why?
I'll put it this way. It was a compulsion, it was a drive.
This guy had to be stopped. And so, as a citizen, I did what I had to do.
Well, back in the 70s, there was a feeling at that time that people wanted to be free. Hitchhiking was very popular. The young people, especially the men, would hitchhike. It was very perfectly safe. My name is Ronald E. Bowers. Back in 1979, I was a senior prosecutor for the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Marcus Grabs was a West German exchange student. He'd come to the United States, didn't have a lot of money, so he was hitchhiking. Marcus Grabs came to Newport Beach. He spent the day or two there, but then he wanted to go up the coast and see more of California. So he got his backpack all packed. He walked over to the Pacific Coast Highway.
You picked him up. Did he happen to say where he was going?
I believe he said he was headed down through Mexico, headed down towards South America. We started heading south, and I started talking to him about did he meet any gay people and everything, and he told me he was gay himself. So that's when I asked him if he'd like to get it on, and he said yes. So I turned around and headed north. I parked, and we got in the back and started getting it on. And that's when I stabbed him in the arm. I stabbed him in the left arm. I stabbed him again, and then again, and again. I pulled him out of the van, and he was still alive. I just kept on stabbing him.
Was he nude or was he...
He was nude.
What'd you do with the clothes? And
I threw it out with him.
On August 6th, Marcus Grabs, 17, of West Germany, was discovered stabbed to death in the Tapas Park area north of Malibu. Forensic tests have shown that Grabs had been sexually assaulted.
police are wondering, this seemed very strange. In such a remote location, a nude body of a young man. But there were no clues. There was nothing at the crime scene that tipped off who could have done it. The police, they needed to find evidence. But back in the 70s, we didn't have all the forensic technology that we have today. That was when they contacted different homicide bureaus, asking them if there's any similar sex crimes they're investigating. And they said, yes, there was. There was a young man in the San Fernando Valley, and he disappeared.
I always remember the 70s as being the best time of my life. This is the house that Tommy and I grew up in, and back in the 70s, there was a lot of kids playing in the street here. We used to play baseball a lot. My name is Brenda Axtell, and I lived in the San Fernando Valley. My brother, Tommy, was really always hustled to get money. And one of the things, he got a job selling flowers on street corners. It was probably about 7 o'clock in the evening. My mother, she was acting very strange. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, Tommy hasn't come home yet. An hour went by, another hour went by, and then I was talking to my dad, and my dad was watching TV, and the 11 o'clock news came on.
The nude body of a young boy was found off Mulholland Highway today, stabbed multiple times and sexually mutilated. Investigators say the body...
I just remember my dad flying out of the chair. He called the sheriff's department and asked about it, and they said, why do you want to know about this? And he said, because I think it's my son. It was him. And he was pretty much unrecognizable, almost, so. You can't even really explain it, the devastation it causes.
In many cases, homicide detectives don't have all the pieces, but in this case, one of the few things they had to work on was Marcus Grabs and Tommy Lundgren were found in the very same area. And there was also the coroner doing the autopsy. Notice that each one of the boys had been sodomized. So is there a connection?
In 1979, I was 29 years old, and it had always been my dream to become a reporter on a big-time TV station. My name is Dave Lopez. I was the main street reporter in Southern California in the late 70s. I covered, all kinds of stories, political stories, crime, obviously. But on this young man, a 13-year-old boy in the valley. People moved to the valley to get away from the crime, so they felt safe. And so to have someone just disappear, he was just a young 13-year-old kid, wanted to make a few bucks and, minding his own business. How preposterous is it that that person would become a murder victim? In that particular area, obviously, it becomes big news. But it took a while before the mainstream news media became aware of, hey, wait a minute, we've got a real heavy-duty sexual predator out there.
A decomposed body of an unidentified male was found in the Cajon Pass on Saturday evening. Pat Adler said the nude body was found by Garrett Kluge.
5 days after Marcus Grab's body was found, a third body was found in San Bernardino County. That had been there for maybe a week. That was Mark Shelton. Homicide sheriffs are wondering what is going on. So the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department contacted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to see if there's something that they might have that's similar. And they said, yes, there was. There were some young men who were nude, who were sexually molested, and they were found in a remote location. That began the sharing of information between the different homicide bureaus, because was there a serial killer on the loose?
Another body found on Monday was identified as Donald Ray Hayden, 15, of Hollywood. He'd been stabbed to death and sexually molested before being left in a dumpster just north of the Ventura Freeway. The Hayden murder is already being considered the fourth body in a series that includes 3 other killings over the past few months.
I remember talking to a couple of the Orange County investigators. I think I found out after the fourth murder that there was some kind of connection to this, only because of the way these kids were being brutally killed and almost the same scenario. The one thing that police had in those days is, they kept stats. So when this came along and you started having an influx, an unbelievable rise in these vicious, horrendous murders, they knew something was wrong. I kept bugging these guys over and over again about a connection.
This is a Channel 2 special presentation.
The scene always looks the same. A young, white, thin male, completely nude. Signs of strangulation, many with rope burns around the ankles and wrists. And the big question is, who and how many people are responsible for these murders?
We're really not formulating any speculations beyond this homicide now, but neither are we closing our minds to the fact that there are other cases here in Los Angeles and outside of Los Angeles that are so far unsolved homicides.
Investigators are very reluctant to answer that question.
Knowing that these tapes exist, I'm mesmerized. I'm about to listen to this man's voice that I have not heard for 40 years. I'm Dr. Vonda Pelto, clinical psychologist, hired into the Los Angeles County Men's Jail, where I saw William Bonin on many occasions.
When you say you strangled him with this pipe, how did you do that? Did you lay it across his neck?
Across his neck, and you apply pressure downward.
The thing I'm most taken with is he could be talking about the Dodger baseball game. No affect, no remorse.
But it was your idea to use the ice pick for what purpose?
I can't give you a reason why I used it except for possibly making sure that the person was dead.
Clinicians rarely ever have an opportunity to really listen to someone who is killed without any kind of guilt.
I didn't hear any noises, so then I went home.
It's unbelievable that this was sitting somewhere and never exposed to the light.
By 1980, law enforcement was concerned that there was a serial killer out there.
We can usually go back to, once we've identified the person, to where they were last seen by someone.
It can create panic on the public. And so I didn't want to be a part of confirming he was a serial killer. Hello, my name is Wyatt Hart. I was the press information officer for the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
There are some similarities to the cases, yes.
Enough to make you think that it's the work of the same person?
Yes, it could be.
You have to be very careful about what you put out. It's very important that you give them the information, but it has to be filtered.
We can only assume that that information that is released to the press is also released to the persons involved in these crimes, which could hamper our investigation.
We kept recommending, and putting out that, don't hitchhike.
At Marina High School in Huntington Beach, and at other high schools in Orange County as well, the word is out. 2 days ago, in preparing this report, a trip along Beach Boulevard, and there were no hitchhikers.
Dave Lopez was a great help to law enforcement from CBS News, for example.
Wyatt Hart was just this old, wonderful, wonderful man. Very kind, very, very patient. And we worked together on television. I told the story of what the hell was going on. And he required the help of the media to get attention to what they're working on.
Flyers are being given to students, and the message is clear. Don't hitchhike. You're tall, you're thin, you got blonde hair. That fits a lot of the people that he has been killing. Are you frightened?
Well, I can't hitchhike, I used to hitchhike just to go home, but you can't really do that no more.
The investigators were working 16, 18 hours a day just on this case. And as the time went on the series of the killings just continues to build and build and build.
17-year-old David Murillo was cycling to a movie theater. His body was found near the Ventura.
Now we're in February of 1980.
Riverside County. 18-year-old Robert Wieristek was hitchhiking to his job at a grocery store.
By this time, there had been 12 young boys, all viciously murdered in a span of 9 months.
County is that of 17-year-old Frank Dennis Fox.
It was a story that had engulfed us, and a story that I had almost done daily reports on.
Dumped by the sides of freeways, who's now being described as the Freeway Killer.
William Bonin was born in 1947 in a small town, Willimantic, Connecticut. William Bonin had an older brother and a younger brother. Both of his parents were alcoholics. When Bonin's father came home from the war, he was extremely violent and would take out these fits of anger on his wife and children. A lot of the men came home from the war damaged. This had a real effect on the family. He took up gambling and excessive drinking. The mother, in order to deal with the husband's abusive behavior, she would drink excessively. The kids were almost always dirty and hungry. When Bonin was young, he always dreamt of running away. But he told me he didn't have any place to run to.
Back in 1980, you didn't feel safe knowing that there was someone out there that was doing these things, especially as we were getting more information leaked to us about just exactly what was happening. I mean, we knew that this freeway killer loved to torture his victims. One victim, an ice pick, was shoved into his ear, almost 3.5 inches. Things that you wouldn't even dream of comprehending what was happening. There was another boy in here, just a 12-year-old little guy. He was on his way to Disneyland.
So we drove further north on Beach Boulevard and we spotted James McCabe. I stopped. I asked him where he was going, and he said he was going to Disneyland. I said, well, hey.
You have to wonder, but then you have to think back of what the times were like. Who today would let a 12-year-old boy go to Disneyland by taking the bus by himself? You wouldn't do it. Back then, it wasn't that unusual.
So he got in, drove down the road, pulled off to the side, and I went to the back, and I had sex with McCabe. I had tied him up. I put his T-shirt around his neck. That's when the youngster realized what was happening, and he yelled out 3 or 4 times, I won't tell anybody. Started kicking, and I strangled him.
McCabe was beaten. He was strangled with his own shirt. His neck was crushed with a jack handle.
Went back and dumped the body off, and then left and went home.
He left his body next to a dumpster in the city of Walnut.
By 1980, there's many different things that are going through the detectives' minds. One of the things that did come up, they were all sexually assaulted. So could this be connected to homosexual activity?
In the 70s, it was a difficult time being gay in California. Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay politicians, was assassinated in his office in City Hall in San Francisco. I'm Don Kilhefner, and I'm the co-founder of something in Los Angeles called the Gay Community Services Center. What you have to remember, there was a law in California that a man could be arrested for just touching another man. The church defined us as evil people, and it affected the entire community. But there were many who were involved in fighting back at that time. The first gay pride parade in Los Angeles, 35,000 people turned out. A new world was being created. What you found happening were young gay men heading towards those major cities. They were leaving their small towns with very, very little in the way of resources. Here in Los Angeles, we had a major influx. The Gay Community Services Center. We provided housing for them, meals for them. Here were these young men who had no money, and so their way of getting around was by hitchhiking. Sometimes working as prostitutes. The Freeway killer exploited that, used that to his nefarious ends.
I went to the Gay Community Service Center this particular day. I talked to them a little bit, told them I could give them a place to stay. I believe it was more for the torture and the killing than it was for the sex. And as time went on, it got so that the torture part was more important, or just a feeling of superiority, of having the power.
When we found out that the victims of the Freeway killer fitted the profile of the young gay men that we were trying to help, we were shocked, angry, sad. At the community center, we had signs out warning young gay people to not be hitchhiking because it was dangerous. So we did what we could to warn people, but not everybody was reached.
I remember Wyatt Hart told us members of the media that there was a connection. They just weren't quite sure who it was. The task force was working feverishly. They were terrified that the media would put something out a little too much, and that would then either drive the one person or the group of people who were doing this underground, or they'd go away, or they'd stop, or they'd go somewhere else. They just did not want to do anything that was going to jeopardize this case. Wyatt, he would tell us a lot of things off the record. Dave, there's more to this than what we can tell you.
Mr. Bonin was polite and articulate. He was difficult in the sense of having a very great difficulty either remembering his traumas or being willing to talk about them. My name is David Foster. I was the clinical psychiatrist in William Bonin's appeals trial to the federal court. There is an account of one of his elementary school friends, and if you don't mind, I'd like to read that. She says, Billy Bonin was in my 6th grade class. One of his neighbors said the boys would dig up potatoes at night from their gardens and eat them raw and unwashed because they were so hungry. He was smart, but he didn't talk much to the other kids. Certain kids always made fun of his ill-fitting clothes and shoes. They called him Bugsy Bonin. He never fought back, but you could see the hurt in his eyes. Back then, I thought of him as a gentle and very sad soul who never tried to harm anyone. There was a tremendous amount of data that I had available to me about what he'd been through. My findings were William Bonin was subjected at an early age to severe physical abuse by his father. This created frontal lobe damage in his brain. And then he was also extremely neglected by his mother. This had a profound effect on his developing brain, specifically the connections in the right hemisphere, which impaired his ability to connect socially and emotionally. All this creates the devastation and tragedy that we see not only with Mr. Bonin, but also, of course, for all of his victims.
The mother finally comes to the conclusion that she really can't handle these 3 kids. So she sends the 2 older boys, Bonin and his brother Robert, to an orphanage. At one point, a priest in the orphanage sexually molested Bonin. And then later on, he was placed in the boys' correctional home. There, unfortunately, he was, again, sexually abused by an older boy. What a horrible, tragic thing for this young child, already being abused in the orphanage and now being in this boys' home and again abused. What chance at life did this little young boy have? We don't know the precise combination that makes up a serial killer. We just know that certain risk factors seem to contribute to it. Having a cold mother who is incapable of giving love, physical and sexual abuse, and then frontal lobe damage. By the age of 10, Bonin already had all of these. When Bonin was 15, the whole family moved from Willimantic to Downey, California, where Bonin changed from being the victim to the perpetrator.
Law enforcement call, I believe it was by a hiker. 2 young men, bodies were found just off of the Ortega Highway. We had a swarm of media personnel out there.
Just where are they located, Lieutenant?
There's on the side of the on-ramp, probably about, one is about 15 feet down the side, the other is about 20 feet.
Any signs of strangulation?
We can't tell any sort of cause of death or anything. We just can't tell yet.
Lieutenant, at this stage, what's the process that now begins?
Well, you search the surrounding area for what might be obvious clues.
Investigators are never surprised by what they find and what people can do to other people, but to find 2 of them out there, it kind of put a different perspective on the investigation.
And neither one is fully clothed.
No, one is nude, the other one is partially clothed.
That was when we realized something's going on here. Immediately you start thinking, well, wait a minute, if you've got 2, it's pretty hard for one guy to take on 2 at one time. So do we have more people involved?
Murders of 2 teenage boys found together in the Cleveland National Forest resemble a string of other slayings across further escalation in the murders connected to the so-called LA County detectives is now working feverishly in their search. Now believe there's been at least 17 murders in less than a year.
Bodies are discovered in Ventura County, even up in Kern County. We know there was one from San Bernardino County and many of them from LA County and eventually some from Orange County. They were long distance away. So who could be moving around from county to county easily like this?
In 1980, my job was to pick up and deliver trucks around the California area. I traveled up and down Highway 101 several times, working with Bill Bonin. I decided to do this interview, and I thought it would be beneficial for the people to know what actually happened. I want to conceal my identity because of guilt by association. When I first met him, he seemed like a very nice guy. I even had him at my house a couple of times for coffee. I had no recollection that he was nothing but a decent person. On one occasion, Bill Bonin and I did a trip up to Northern California. And I mentioned to him that I heard that there was another victim of the Freeway killer. I just referred to the fact that I wish that they'd catch the guy that was doing this. And about all Bill said to me, yeah, I wish they'd catch him too. When we were on our way back, the vehicle I was driving started to act up. And we pulled off. Bill suggested that we leave him there and I drive the vehicle he was driving because we had further to go home than he had. By the time I had gotten back to City of Industry, Bill Bonin had been there for approximately 10 minutes. He had a young man with him, late teens. He had sandy color hair, and he had an injured upper lip. Then I left and went home. I didn't see Bill for probably a couple of weeks after that.
The nude body of a young man found in a service station might be another victim of the so-called freeway killer.
I feel that there is a similarity, at least generally, in so much as this fits the pattern of young males, nude, clean-looking, dropped near a freeway area, who have died from strangulation.
Larry Sharp, it shook me up pretty good. What's the chances of working with a freeway killer? Little did I know I was sitting next to him.
Homicide detectives believe the killer has now claimed his task force across Southern California is working night and day to solve this rapidly expanding investigation before the death toll rises any further.
Homicide detectives couldn't keep up. It put even more pressure on the detectives. You know, we got to catch this guy.
In the turn of the 1980s, Southgate, California was going through a transition. The city was changing, General Motors was closing down. You have some notorious gangs that were infiltrating the junior highs and the high schools.
My name is Ray Carvajal. I was youth pastor at Southgate Foursquare Church, Southgate, California, during the time of the freeway killer.
Through kids coming in here and there, asking for help, getting out of certain groups is sometimes difficult, and sometimes you have to walk away. I wanted to give them something that they can rely on, and that's the Word of God. Sean started coming into the youth group. He was 14 years old. He was looking for a change. It was just exciting to see these kids become part of your life, and you're trying to impact them in a positive way. May of 1980 was a day I will never forget.
Well, we're at the location where we ran into Sean. We pulled right up here, and I looked to my right as I'm getting ready to exit, and I told my wife, that looks like Sean. And she looked over and she goes, that is Sean. So he continued walking this way, and he came around the car.
I can still see the blonde hair and those big blue eyes. It's like a kid that is just starting off life.
Started talking about, obviously, the transition he's making, the starting over at a new junior high.
I said, I see you walking. Did your mom drop you off at the corner or something like that? She goes, no, I take the bus. You know, I leave Firestone Boulevard. I said, well, you have a good day.
Little did I know that that morning was going to be the last time I saw Sean.
Where and when did you first see him?
I saw him at the bus stop on the corner of Cold River School Road and Firestone Boulevard. So I pulled up and I asked him where Atlantic Boulevard was, and he told me it was up the road. And I said, are you waiting for the bus? He goes, yeah. I said, well, this is the last bus is already run. And I said, well, hop in, I'll give you a ride.
What was your intention?
My intentions were to go out and have sex with Sean King and kill him.
We got home from work, and I get a call from Sean's mom, and she goes, Sean has not arrived. I said, I took the drive looking for Sean. I remember calling our youth president And I said, hey, can you get everybody to just start calling all the kids and saying, hey, is Sean with you? And then we see that breaking news.
A 14-year-old boy has disappeared in a suspected kidnapping. He was last seen at Firestone Boulevard.
And one of the kids kind of looked back, and now where Sean takes the bus? And it's like all of a sudden we kind of knew.
So I started positioning Sean, and he said, no. He says, well, you can let me out right here and stuff. So that's when I pulled out the knife, and I put my hand around his neck. He didn't try to resist or anything. He just says, I don't want to die. Tied his hands behind his back and tied his feet. And then took off and head out towards San Bernardino.
I mean, where do you look? Where are they headed? Nothing. You have zero to work on. We heard of the Freeway killer through the news. I said, you know what? They've been trying to break this case. All the indicators are there, and they have not been able to break this case. And the kid said, let's just pray.
I finally stopped on the side of this road. There was no traffic at all. And I sodomized him. Then we walked to the place where I dumped him. I used my t-shirt. I was starting to strangle him. It wasn't working, so I took the knife and stabbed him.
Where did you stab?
I stabbed him in the side, both sides, and up in the upper left part of the back, in the throat 2 or 3 times, and in the mouth part. And I started walking away, and this is when I heard some noises coming out of him. And so I stabbed him a couple more times.
And there's nothing we can do.
I interviewed Sean King's mother a number of times. Very, very, very sweet woman. You met these people, you met family members, you met the brothers, you met the sisters, you met the moms, you met the dads. I mean, they were just absolutely heartbroken. And you felt so bad because you felt so helpless that you couldn't do anything. More than once, after I would be finished, I would go home and, you know, a lot of times it'd be late at night and my kids were growing up at that time, they were small. And I would just look at them and just, you know, almost have a tear come to my eye, knowing how lucky and fortunate I am that they're safe and sound. You count your lucky stars at a time like that. Sean King's mother, like so many other people that I had interviewed, they just wanted to know why.
I asked you, Mr. Bonin, on the Turner case.
Did you intend to sodomize him after you tied him up?
I knew I was going to tie him up, and then I guess whatever was going to come to mind.
In spite of the fact that William Bonin's brain did not develop normally, and he did not have the capacity for normal affiliation and empathy, he still had this longing for connection.
At that point, I tied him up, and I had sex with him.
Tell me how you strangled him.
I believe I would have used his t-shirt.
If we got into the details of what happened when he was growing up, we would see what he did was replicate the type of abuse. He was bound by the older boys in the juvenile system who would rape and beat him. He was strangled by them. We form bonds under intense emotional experience. So he forms these
sadomasochistic bonds by being bound and choked and raped by 12 to 19-year-olds. Who are those he kills? 12 to 19-year-olds. He needed someone who could share his experience, and so he went about trying to create those who were victimized like he was victimized.
Why did you decide to tie him up?
So render him helpless.
Why?
I guess it made me feel more superior to him if he was scared.
He explicitly states what he enjoyed was not, it wasn't about the sex. It was about the feeling of control, about the feeling of dominance. The worst feeling for a human being is helplessness. All of his life, he's this helpless waif. When it finally explodes forth and he has no right hemisphere to evaluate terror, rage, despair, it's inevitable. There's nothing that he could do to stop it.
For Stephen, June 2nd started like most days did in the last 3 months of his life. He left this small, downy apartment where he lived alone, and he took a bus to work in Los Angeles. When last seen alive, Stephen was at this bus stop shortly after 3 o'clock. Sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight. That's when Stephen was strangled, his nude body then dumped and discovered shortly before 1 a.m. behind this dark, deserted gas station in Huntington Beach.
Bodies of young boys are now being discovered on a weekly basis. Murderous rampage across Southern California appears to be escalating.
Back in the 70s and 80s, the homicide detectives didn't have all the tools available to them as homicide detectives do today. We didn't have DNA, the computers. They had to be very creative. By 1980, they were looking for a break in the case. They were using adhesive tape or Scotch tape, and they would put it on different parts of the body of the victims to see if they could detect any type of hair, any type of fiber. And they noticed on Stephen Wood, it was a green fiber. And they compared it up to other fibers that were taken off the other victims, and it was the same.
They took all that into the labs, and they came up with the fiber that was from a carpet that was sold for vans. And they actually found the type of carpet, the manufacturer of the carpet. Then they started looking at where it was sold the most.
This was a big break. Now they knew there was a scientific connection between these cases. But nothing was uncovered to point a clue as to who that suspect could be. And then sometime later, in the most bizarre way, everything changed. There was a young juvenile, Billy Pugh was his name, and he was a car thief. Stole one, and he got caught.
In the majority of cases, the bodies have been dumped near freeways, so the suspect investigators are looking for has been dubbed the Freeway Killer.
He was in custody, waiting for his case to come up, and for some reason he heard on the radio somebody talking about the Freeway Killer and the nude bodies and the remote locations and so forth. Now, Billy Pugh didn't like the fact he got caught, so he was willing to make a deal. So he said to his counselor, I think I know who that could be. That counselor took that information and contacted a police officer on the case, Jigsaw John. He came out the next day and talked to Billy Pugh. And that's when Billy Pugh said, you know, I was at a party one time and I left the party, I came outside, and a guy offered me a ride. Then he started kind of playing around with me, touching me, which I didn't like. He started telling me how he liked to kill people. He liked to molest people. Billy Pugh was kind of afraid. He wanted to get away. And when he got to his house, the guy said to him, okay, I'm gonna let you go because people saw us together. Billy Pugh explained to Jigsaw John that his name was William Bonin. As soon as Jigsaw John finished the interview, he went back down, talked to the task force, and he ran the name, William Bonin, through the rap sheet. They couldn't believe what they were reading. One offense after another offense after another offense, all of the sex crimes that he had been convicted of. The fact that he had been sent to Atascadero, the mental hospital for California. Then he was sent to the state prison because there wasn't anything they could do with him at the mental institution. Whammo! This was a big break in the case.
When Bonin was convicted in 1969, he was convicted of sexually abusing 4 teenagers.
Would you bring the patient in, please?
And so the court decided to have him interviewed by a psychiatrist, who then put the label of mentally disordered sexual offender. And he was sent off to Atascadero for hospitalization to be cured of these tendencies toward homosexuality and raping young boys.
Once in his cell, the man's condition should be checked often. It is not unusual for mentally disturbed people to have moods that swing from one extreme to the other.
At the time that Bonin was there, they would use extremely aversive techniques, shocks, using electroconvulsive therapy, not as treatment, but as a way of softening someone up. They had this ancient notion that if you had a homosexual orientation, you could force someone into a conversion to heterosexuality.
We tried to intervene at Atascadero State Hospital and bring some sanity into that arena. There are records of gay men as young as 14 being sent there. And they could do whatever they wanted to there. Chemical emasculations. A whole new mental illness was created around us. It wasn't only at Atascadero, it was happening all over the country.
I think the understanding of these things was so primitive at that time. The methods were so limited that their efforts were more damaging than helpful. The tragedy of what made Bonin who he is incalculable.
Ultimately, he was in Atascadero because the staff was saying he is not cured, but the psychiatrist said there's still hope for him. So ultimately, Bonin, after years of treatment in a Atascadero and prison, he was released in late 1708.
What was interesting about it was that just 6 months or so later was the genesis of the freeway killer serial killings.
And in his diary, he says, from now on, there will not be any more victims left alive.
William Bonin should have never been released from prison. This was definitely a lost opportunity. One of the victims was 12, for God's sakes. You know, in the prime of your life, you're just beginning living. And to have society let someone out like a Bonin roam free, not fair, it's not right, and sure, it leaves me angry.
Investigators now believe the death toll has reached 21 bodies, putting the murderer in league with America's most deadly serial killers. Homicide detectives say they're pursuing a number of suspects in the case.
After Jigsaw John had gotten the information from Billy Pugh, this gave law enforcement the opportunity to zero in. But they had no evidence on this William Bonin. The ball is now in the court of the detectives to figure out a way, how are they going to build a case? They decided, we've got to catch him in the act. On the 9th day, William Bonin drives to the Hollywood area. The surveillance team is trying to follow him. He's driving up and down, and he picks up a young man. There's some type of transaction that it takes place. They drive to an isolated area. And after a while, the van starts shaking. But at what stage should the detectives get out and go over there and look inside to see what's going on? If they waited too long, what could happen? That victim could be the next person killed. And immediately they could see that this victim was tied up, I think was handcuffed. And they realized that he was being sexually molested. This victim was 17 years old. That meant they could arrest William Bonin for lewd and lascivious act on a minor. Now, if he had been an adult, they most likely would not have been able to arrest him. There was kind of a green shag carpeting in the back, very similar to the fibers that they had found earlier. But also in the side of the van, there was a cord, pliers, a car jack, there was a tire iron, there was blood spatter on the walls, there was blood on the floor. In the glove box, they found newspaper clippings of the Freeway killer. But also, there were no handles on the door. If you were a victim in that van, there was no way of escaping. So he's arrested. Now they know they have him off the street. But they didn't arrest him for being the Freeway killer. They arrested him for lewd and lascivious conduct on a minor. Now they had to see if they could find any concrete evidence that they could tie him to these serial killings. They needed the smoking gun.
Los Angeles Police Department said last night they have arrested a man in connection with the so-called are being very cautious right now. So far, 32-year-old William Bonin is a suspect
in the back of a 1973 Ford van with a young man, allegedly committing an act of sodomy.
William Bonin remains in custody as investigators process the evidence obtained during a search of his home. Authorities from various jurisdictions are trying to see if he may be
The night that
responsible
Bonin
for other murders.
was arrested, put out the address of his the house. Every station in town was there. Every reporter was there. There must have been 20 to 30 detectives just swarming. It was a madhouse. This was the home of his mother. Through all of this bedlam, I saw this woman. Found out almost right away that it was Bonin's mother. And she was all by herself. Obviously, she was in shock. And I felt sorry for her. You know, just sitting there and all this commotion all around her, and she looked like the loneliest person in the world. I took note of it. Said, you know what? I'm gonna come back. The next morning, I showed up, and to my surprise, there was absolutely nobody. I mean, nobody was in front of that house. She answered the door, and I introduced myself. I told her who I am, and would she like to talk about her son and about what she went through last night and what she has to say about her, about him. And to my shock, she agreed.
I spoke to his mother in an exclusive interview, and she freely talked about her son and about his tendencies.
I know he's a homosexual, and they've been trying to cure him of it, but he's not a murderer.
Does he talk to you openly about his homosexual tendencies?
Yes, he's very frank with me. He's very honest. He will not lie to me.
The stories that boys in the neighborhood were saying yesterday about how he'd offer other boys money, how he'd always want to be on the lookout for hitchhikers, is that true?
I believe it is.
Does he ever explain to you or tell you in detail what he does when he picks up these boys?
No.
You were telling me earlier that he has admitted to you that he would put handcuffs on some of his boys that he would pick up?
When he first came back from Vietnam, he was violent, yes.
Tell me a little more about that, if you will.
Well, in the courts, when it was admitted that he did that, they put handcuffs on him, and he would put it on them and do his act and then let him go. He never hurt them.
What's it been like for you the last couple of hours, the last day, I guess, since the detectives knocked on your door?
I never knew someone could go through something like this without breaking down. He's innocent. I know he is. They'll prove it some way or another.
The police, they knew they had the right person, but they needed concrete evidence in order to convict William Bonin. And so they needed witnesses to cooperate and come forth and provide information. So the next thing that the task force does, they start asking around. Who knows William Bonin? They go wherever he has had contact. Someone said, yeah, you know, we've seen William Bonin. He hangs out with Vernon Butts. So they find his address and they go over to his house. Vernon Butts, he says, yeah, I know who William Bonin is. I sometimes drive his van. And then he starts talking about we would drive at night and pick up hitchhikers. Immediately, that police officer thinks, wow, we've got something here. Vernon Butts said Bonin would get in the back of the van and they would pull the curtain. Vernon Butts could hear different things going on, screaming. He could hear sexual activity. Constantly, Butts is downplaying his involvement. But the detectives realized, wow, you know, he's confessing. This was a big break in the case. And so detectives arrested Vernon Butts. He was essential for the prosecution, and we were willing to make a deal with him that if he would testify against William Bonin, we would not go for the death penalty. And he did it. He gave some names. He said, you better check these people out. And they couldn't believe what was uncovered. William Bonin, when committing his crimes, he had all these accomplices. He was smart in the way of knowing how to use people, manipulate people. And that's why he would pick on people who weren't that bright. Vernon Butts was the main accomplice who would do the driving. He testified that also there was a Monroe. He was homeless. He helped him at the very end do a killing. Greg Miley, he was one that could be talked into it, did it a few times for him. But the one that was most surprising was Billy Pugh. Billy Pugh was the one that blew the whistle. These young men would help him out in picking up hitchhikers, driving the van so that he could molest the victim in the back of the van. Very strange for a serial killer to use another person when you have somebody else, another accomplice. That means that person could be a witness against you.
I met all of his recruits, and they were all very dependent, passive, homosexual young boys who were not very bright. One of them had an IQ of 56, and normal is 100. Bonin took these boys in and made them his lovers, and then asked them to kill. He corrupted them and made them victims also.
When we prosecuted the case, we filed 14 murders against William Bonin. The district attorney's office, in order to make a decision on whether they should seek the death penalty, they needed to hear from the defense as to any mitigating evidence, how remorseful you are, or whether you really did it or not. So they gave the defendant, William Bonin, an opportunity to say whatever they wanted. It was on the understanding that it would not be used against him in a court of law. So that's where these tapes come from.
Where do you want to start, buddy?
Well, we start with Marcus Grabs. I reached down and I grabbed a hold of his nuts and I squeezed them. And it hurt, so he broke loose from the bondage. And that's when I stabbed him again and again, until he was completely sort of like helpless, but he was still alive.
I think we can say safely with William Bonin that no, he was not an innocent person. No, he could not be rehabilitated. So there could be a strong argument that he was deserving of the death penalty.
I pulled him onto the van, and he was still alive, and I had to talk myself into stabbing him more in order to kill him. I know I couldn't leave him there, alive. And I grabbed his ear and I banged it against the rock that was right there next to where you found him.
Once we had made the decision to go for the death penalty, we were never going to use those tapes in any way, shape, or form. They were meant to be confidential, and they were never to be told to the public. Vernon Butts was a man with many problems, but he was essential for the prosecution because he was the main accomplice.
Butts became distraught about being pressured in to testify against Bonin, and he loved Bonin, so he hung himself in the jail.
This was a severe blow to the prosecution. We needed Butts's testimony. How is William Bonin going to be prosecuted now? As a result of that, we had to reevaluate the case. We had to dismiss several of the murders because we knew we couldn't prove them without his testimony. That was when we brought in these other accomplices. We had to use them, but it was very difficult. Criminals of limited IQ, they're terrible witnesses in court. And so the case could go down the drain.
Bonin had an attorney by the name of Earl Hansen. I remember one time waiting to get an interview with Earl, and he says to me, pulls me aside, and he says, "Dave, I got to tell you something. I saw the interview you did with Bonin's mother. My client saw it, and he was very happy with the way you treated his mother. So here's my card. Take this card," and he wrote something on the back. It says on the back, "Permission to talk to Bonin." What happened back in 1980 would never happen today. There is no way in the world that a reporter on a major case like this would get permission from anyone to get to the jail and talk to the defendant. So here I am. I go in, I show the card. The guard says, "Okay, fine, go here." In comes Bonin. I thought, wow, this is incredible. And I was surprised by his size. He wasn't all that big, but there was something about him that terrified me. We just started a casual conversation. He said to me, "I want to thank you for being kind to my mom." I didn't even ask him if he committed these crimes or not. I wanted to tread very, very lightly. Then the third meeting. Walked in, said hi, and he says, "Are you ready?" I go, "For what?" He says, "I'm going to tell you something." And then he proceeded to tell me that just hook, line, and sinker, the murders. He told me that he had killed 21. I'm in shock listening to this guy describe how they picked up one kid, they put an ice pick in his side of his head. One of his accomplices, Butts, went crazy and stabbed another guy 70 times. He told me about some other kid who squealed and cried and was easy to kill. And then he tells me that, he enjoyed it. Once he started, he couldn't stop. I didn't take any notes because I knew if I had, he would have stopped talking. And then he proceeded to tell me that he wanted to avoid the death penalty at all costs. And that he wanted me to see if that could be done. And I said, "I don't have any power to do that." So I walked out of there stunned. I didn't know what the hell to do. And now I'm stuck. What in the world am I going to do with this? I got this blockbuster story. I knew that once I put this on the air, if I ever put it on the air, that the police would swarm on me like I was one of the suspects. And on June 29th of 1981, I went on CBS 2, and I told the story of how I got the confession and what he had said.
This is a Channel 2 special presentation.
I am at the men's jail, and this is the scene that Mr. Bonin has seen at least 3 times. This is the booking area of the jail.
It was like a bomb had gone off. I knew that the police wanted all the explicit details of the conversations that Bonin and I had. And then the trial begins. I was under a lot of pressure to testify. Prosecution, detectives, certain police chiefs, investigators, private investigators, family of the victims. I was a reporter, I had a credibility, and I certainly was a whole lot better witness than the knuckleheads that were with Bonin.
We will indeed prove in this courtroom that he is the Freeway killer, as he has bragged to a number of witnesses.
But as a journalist, you need sources, and you've got to be able to have someone who can give you vital information, know that you are going to protect them.
You have heard about the principle among journalists that a reporter must protect a confidential source.
And so what the California Shield Law does, it prevents anyone from law enforcement to go in and force you to reveal or say what you have not reported yet. They are not allowed to go into your private notes or your personal files or anything like that. So in other words, there are things that they may want to know that weren't publicized. If I had given that up, I would have been run out of the business. It is our gospel. You don't break it.
You know, there has been reporters that have gone to jail rather than give up their source, even if they're court ordered. I would have encouraged him to do it, but it was a big no-no for him amongst his peers.
The prosecution has called parents and friends to testify.
After you talked to during that day, did you ever see or hear from your son again?
The trial goes on. Bonin had pleaded not guilty. And the one thing that really always haunted me was the grieving mothers.
Do you recognize that as being the body of your son?
I just had a lot of soul searching. My dad made a very famous quote to me. He said, "That's what you get for trying to make a deal with the devil. You should have never got put yourself in this predicament." Well, I did, so what was I going to do? I went to a couple of very prominent people that I worked with in the business, and there was one man named Bill Stout, and he said to me, "I know your predicament, but you got to remember something. We are citizens first and journalists second."
9 weeks into the trial of William Bonin, the man accused in the so-called Freeway murders of 21 young men, a surprise witness came forward. Claiming he could no longer live with his conscience, television reporter Dave Lopez revealed Bonin confessed to him nearly a year ago.
He says, "I killed them all except one."
That was what Mr. Bonin said?
Bonin's exact words, "I killed them all except one."
I asked him point blank, I said, "Bill, if you were still out in the street, what would you be doing right now?" He said, "I'd still be killing. Couldn't stop killing," he said. "It got easier each victim we did."
I answered every question and went into detail of what he told me.
I testified as a citizen because I firmly believe that when the question comes up, are we journalists or citizens first, we are citizens first. The public has a right to know. The jury has a right to know. Every mother and father who ever loved a child have a right to know.
I got some criticism. A lot of people thought I did the wrong thing that were in my business.
In no way, gentlemen, do I feel that I have in any way embarrassed the profession or embarrassed myself.
He took an awful lot of heat from a lot of his peers. but I supported him 100%. Most of the citizens out there appreciate that he was very involved in getting this maniac off the streets. He was law enforcement's hero, I'll guarantee you.
Pursuant to Penal Code Section 190.3 of the State of California, do determine the penalty shall be death.
He was convicted of 10 first-degree murders out of Los Angeles County.
William George Bonin has demonstrated a wanton and total disregard for the sanctity of human life and the dignity of a civilized society. William George Bonin shall be put to death by the administration of lethal gas within the walls of the state prison at San Quentin, California.
The families, I know they were very happy. There were tears of joy from a lot of them.
Thankful that it's over with, and we had a super jury, and the verdict was, he earned it. He earned it.
In Los Angeles, William Bonin has been convicted of 10 murders.
He was convicted for the homosexual torture murders of 10 young men and boys.
Today, the so-called Freeway killer was sentenced to death in the gas chamber.
Greg Milley, he got 25 years to life. He was killed in custody in 2016. James Moreau, he got 15 to life. He is still in custody. And Billy Pugh, he got 6 years and is now out. 2 years later, they were able to convict William Bonin of 4 murders in Orange County. The Orange County jury also agreed on the death penalty. He was permanently sent up to San Quentin, placed on death row, where he remained for 14 years.
Bonin's guilt is beyond dispute. His case has been argued and examined from every angle. The whole process has consumed more years than Bonin allowed some of his young victims to live.
I still see those faces. It's still haunting at times, but I'm glad I was able to do my part as a citizen, and I hold my head high.
For certain crimes, justice demands the ultimate punishment. William Bonin will never kill again. Clemency is denied.
It makes me feel compassion for him and sadness and outrage that over and over and over there were opportunities to intervene in this child's life. And then we have the tragic loss of all he killed. I think as a society, we need to understand what made Bonin who he is so that we can take both policy actions and individual actions to help to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
Okay, we'll end the tape here, and it's $20-40.